Today's work is The Rite of Spring. It's a ballet. Literally is the only piece of art I can point to and say, when this premiered, it caused a riot. Let's talk. The Rite of Spring means literally sacred spring. In French, le sacre du printemps. It's a ballet and orchestral concert work by the Russian composer Igor Stravinsky. It was written for the 1913 season of Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. The original choreography was by Nijinsky with stage designs and costumes by Nicholas Roerich. When it was first performed at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées on the 29th of May in 1913, the avant-garde nature of the music and the choreography caused a sensation. Many have called that first night reaction a riot. And as we look at this work over the ages, although it was originally intended as a work for the stage, the music achieved recognition as a major concert work and is widely considered to be one of the most influential musical works of the 20th century. The premiere of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring is perhaps the most famous scandal in the history of the performing arts. It took place at the brand new Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Paris in front of a glittering audience. The writer Jean Cocteau wrote that the smart audience in tails and tulle, diamonds and ospreys was interspersed with the suits and bandeaux of the aesthetic crowd. The latter would applaud novelty simply to show their contempt for the people in the boxes. So what we have in 1913 Paris is a polarized society. You got your rich people in their fancy seats, and you got the more bohemian people hanging out, and the bohemian people will pretty much do anything they can to annoy the rich people because the rich people have set things up in Paris at this time to, well, benefit their class of people, etc., etc. And, again, a polarized society. And as they say, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, which means the more things change, the more they stay the same. So the art, music, and ballet world, they were ready for a revolution. So Stravinsky, Igor Stravinsky. He was young, virtually unknown composer when Diaghilev recruited him to create works for the Ballet Russe. Diaghilev had a great talent for finding amazing composers who would do work that even today is looked at as major works of music for his company. Despite the name Ballet Russe, the company never actually performed in Russia, where the revolution, which was about to come, was disrupting society. Society was already in some sort of disarray in Russia at this time. So Diaghilev had relocated to Paris, and the Ballet Russe took their name because it's true that many of the dancers had received their training in Russia. So 1913, it was a very interesting period of time in Paris. It's right before World War I, and it's a high point of art and culture. Paris, in 1913, as before, was the home of the Salon. Salon is a tradition of showcasing great artists together, which results in the social interaction of a lot of these people, these artistic geniuses, hanging out together in the city. And in this fertile web, if you will, of creativity, Stravinsky workshopped the idea for Rite of Spring with the set designer Nicholas Roerich and the choreographer Václav Nijinsky. The Rite was the third ballet for Stravinsky that he'd written for the Ballet Russe, after the acclaimed Firebird, which was in 1910, and Petrushka, which was in 1911. And the concept, the story behind Rite of Spring, developed by Roerich from Stravinsky's outline idea, is suggested by its subtitle, Pictures of Pagan Russia in Two Parts. And the scenario shows various primitive rituals celebrating the coming of spring, the advent of spring, after which a young girl, a tribal girl, is chosen by the village elders, as a sacrificial victim. And she dances herself to death. Basically, The idea is to ensure a good harvest for the tribe. A young maiden is sacrificed for the good of the tribe. Kind of a twisty place to start a piece of art. Stravinsky's score contains many novel features for its time, including he experimented in tonality, meter, rhythm, stress, dissonance, which is when you have notes that essentially work against each other. The music influenced many of the 20th century's leading composers and is one of the most heavily recorded works in all of classical music. And many of the great film scores of the 20th century draw heavily on the Rite of Spring. John Williams, essentially in Star Wars, stole great chunks of the essence of sections of the Rite of Spring for his earliest score in Star Wars. When you're first on Tatooine, it sounds just like Rite of Spring, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's talk about the theater where this production took place. The Theatre des Champs-Élysées was a brand new structure which had opened in April of 1913 with a program celebrating the works of many of the leading composers of the day. And the theater's manager was determined to house the 1913 Ballet Russe season, so he had to pay Diaghilev a huge amount of money in those days. The large sum of 25,000 francs performance, double what he'd paid the previous year in a different location. The program for the 29th of May, when the Stravinsky Rite of Spring premiered, included several other works which were very different in texture and type and were much more feeding a traditional approach to ballet. The intent in Rite of Spring, the ballet, is to startle the audience, is to mess with the audience, if you will. Traditional ballet has toes turned out, and the technique is based in grace and lightness in jumps and landings. Nijinsky, the choreographer, went in the complete opposite direction. Nijinsky's choreography offended even the dancers with its insistence. He made the dancers turn their toes in, and he insisted that they would land flatly and painfully after leaps, smashing into the stage, making a lot of noise. So this dance, choreographed by Nijinsky, was what really caused the scandal the first night, according to some observers. When the curtain rose, the audience saw a group of knock-kneed and long-braided Lolitas jumping up and down, as Stravinsky was said to have called them, who seemed to jerk rather than dance. Classical dance aspires upwards in defiance of gravity, where Nijinsky's dancers seemed pulled down to earth. Their strange stamping movements and awkward poses defied every tradition of gracefulness and ballet that had come before. What drew the swanky and art-loving crowd was the whiff of something potentially outrageous. A brand new ballet from the Ballet Russe, a company of Russian dancers put together by the world's most famous impresario in history, Sergei Diaghilev. The Ballet Russe had entranced and shocked Paris ever since their first appearance there in 1909. What the Parisians especially liked was the way these, quote, northern savages, as one critic called the company, played to the fashion for everything primitive and untamed. All of the rumors prior to the release of Rite of Spring, all of the rumors suggested that this new ballet would be more than usually primitive. Stravinsky, the composer, had scored a massive hit the year before with Petrushka, a ballet in which three puppets act out a story of love and jealousy. And this added an exciting element of modernist collage to colorful Russian folklore. Vaslav Nijinsky, the famous dancer, who was also the choreographer of the Rite, had caused a minor scandal a few months previously with his kind of over-the-top, blatant portrayal of the the lovesick faun, shall we say, in Debussy's L'après-midi d'enfant. At that time, a Parisian ballet audience typically consisted of these two diverse groups that we mentioned before. The wealthy and fashionable set, who would be expecting to see a traditional performance with beautiful music. And, like, a more bohemian group, who the poet-philosopher Jean Cocteau asserted would acclaim, right or wrong, anything that is new, because of their hatred of the boxes being where the rich people would sit. The trouble probably began when the two factions began attacking each other, but their mutual anger was soon diverted towards the orchestra. An orchestra member said, "Everything available was tossed in our direction, but we continued to play on." Around 40 of the worst offenders in the audience were ejected, possibly with the intervention of the police, although historians aren't completely sure. Through all of these disturbances, the performance continued without interruption. What is certain that happened that night was that the audience was shocked, and with good reason. Stravinsky's score for the Rite contradicted every rule about what music should be or had been. The sounds are deliberately harsh, right from the opening. The Lithuanian folk melody, which is played by the bassoon in its highest, strained, most uncomfortable range. The music at times was cacophonously loud. It just assaulted your ears with thunderous percussion and shrieking brass. And rhythmically, it's complex in a completely unprecedented way. For example, in Ritual of the Rival Tribes, the music unfolds in two speeds at once, at a ratio of 3-2. Stravinsky makes lavish use of the dissonance, that's combinations of notes that don't make normal harmonic sense. The music always goes to the note next to the one that you might expect, wrote one exasperated critic. And yet, all these years later, we all look at the Rite of Spring as a major work. It attracts people like to analyze music because clearly it's not atonal. It makes sense on some level, but it's tremendously complex, and it makes use of modes in a way that almost nobody had at that time and has since. Anyhow, the Rite of Spring, a work that actually caused a riot on the night of its premiere, and a work that we're still talking about more than 100 years later. I'd give it a listen. It's certainly worthwhile.